This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. And if you've got to watch something multiple times to see the good in it, it's probably not worth doing. The reason I mention this is because I rented Neil Marshall's The Lair. Now keep in mind, Neil Marshall is the director of Dog Soldiers. He's the director of The Descent. He's the director of Doomsday. He's the director of Hellboy, which was not his fault. I don't care what anyone says, that movie was a colossal clusterfuck. Had relatively little to do with Neil Marshall. And he's also the director of The Lair. And The Lair is not a great movie. I want it to be a great movie so bad. Because Dog Soldiers. Because The Descent. I like Neil Marshall, genuinely, as a director. And I want his project to succeed. But me watching The Lair multiple times, I've watched it 1.5 times at this point. I just kind of stopped. Because what am I doing? Doesn't change anything. And what's not being changed is that The Lair is essentially not a very good movie. And it has many problems. One of them being, it has what I call the John Carpenter font. If you've seen any John Carpenter movie, particularly The Thing and Prince of Darkness, though I assume the others as well, and They Live, to be sure, you've seen the John Carpenter font. He doesn't own it, but his use of it is so iconic that if I see that font, I associate it with a John Carpenter production because he's the first person I ever saw use it, and he did it so effectively and so consistently that I can't separate him from the font. Yeah, that's weird. In any case, with The Lair, Neil Marshall uses the John Carpenter font, which kind of irritated me, but at the same time, it also gave me hope. And it also opens like Ridley Scott's Prometheus, making what is supposed to be Afghanistan, I'm reasonably sure it's not because budget, but what's supposed to be Afghanistan look alien, which is interesting. Well, alien lowercase name, which is interesting. The movie revolves around a pilot who is shot down, and she has to make her way around the country while being pursued by the people who shot her down. It's worth mentioning that Charlotte Kirk, who plays the lead in The Lair, is also the producing partner with Neil Marshall. She writes with him while he directs. And the most recent movies that he's done, he's worked with her. And the idea of having a woman in the lead of a Neil Marshall production is not unusual. After all, The Descent was entirely women-driven, and it was a great movie. That's neither here nor there. It's literally not relevant because it works so well. Here, not so much. This movie seems to have issues. For instance, it seems to be under-budgeted in some ways, by which I mean you have mostly practical blood splatter, but there's some CGI blood splatter as well. And you have CGI bullet impacts. So when one person is shooting at another person, what happens is that you see CGI sparks and that type of thing. And it looks terrible. There's so much practical blood effects in this movie that it really is weird that they would go to CGI bullet impacts. It takes you out of the movie, it's distracting, and it looks terrible. And it always looks terrible. As I said, there's also practical blood splatter, and that looks great. But there's occasionally CGI blood splatter, which looks crappy. because it's CGI blood splatter and it typically looks really bad. So there's so many conflicting impulses in this movie. In any case, the story somewhat revolves around the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. And in the movie, they were creating alien-human hybrids. Now here's where some problems arise. As you're probably aware, the Russians left Afghanistan. But in the movie's logic, they left their experimentation behind a door with a chain and a padlock. I kid you not. This makes no sense. You mean to tell me the Russians are experimenting with alien and human DNA to create, I assume, the ultimate soldier, and they leave it behind? Now keep in mind, when Charlotte Kirk's character arrives at the base, there are some dead men behind as well. And in fact, her fighting those rebels that are trying to kill her results in freeing these creatures. But just the premise of it makes no sense. Why would they leave this behind? And if not left behind, you need to explain via the narrative as to why it's there. Because trust me, if any government is experimenting with alien and human hybrids, like an X-Files episode, they are not leaving it behind. In fact, when they do leave, that's what they're going to take. And they're going to take that over their soldiers and virtually anything else that they decide to take with them. So the story on its own doesn't make sense. Charlotte Kirk is not a bad actress. And considering the fact that she helped write this as well, does okay. But it's written in such a manner that it feels very off. For instance, Charlotte Kirk's character will occasionally use slang. And while there's no law that says a British person can't understand slang, be it American or from anywhere else, it comes off really odd in this movie. She seems to talk in a way that she perhaps shouldn't know how to, and that perhaps she shouldn't understand. Now, the way I'm interpreting that could be very cliche, in the sense that she's British, and certain aspects of American culture, such as the way language is used, shouldn't perhaps be something she very easily understands. She could be someone who's really into such things, but the narrative does not establish that. It does not establish the basis of her understanding what these people are saying. But understand it, she does, and she responds accordingly. It's odd, I wouldn't say it's off-putting, but it's a little strange because it doesn't quite sync. There's a silliness to the way things proceed that undermine the material. It wants to mimic a John Carpenter film, particularly The Thing, but it doesn't quite do so convincingly. Nothing really makes sense. It's gory at times. Oh, I forgot to mention one of the worst things about this movie. Jamie Bamber, who you may recall from Battlestar Galactica, who is actually British, by the way, and does a really good American accent, though for some reason he seems to feel the need to challenge himself in this movie. So he does a Southern accent. Southern as in the American South. It feels so stereotypical of a Southern accent. In other words, it sounds like a person trying their damnedest to do a Southern accent, as opposed to a person just talking with a Southern accent. And the issue with that is that if you talk with a person from the South, not every word they say sounds like it's being spoken with an accent. Bamber overdoes it, and it's silly. And what's worse for me is that they're actually a British contingent of soldiers they encounter in the movie. Why not have him be, I don't know, British? Because he is actually British. The Lair is not a terrible movie for the most part. It is watchable. But what concerns me so much is that it feels like it's also witnessing the decline of a great director in real time. And that is really kind of sucky. Is it true? I have no idea. Because, as I said, the last thing I saw from Neil Marshall was Hellboy. And I don't blame him for that mess at all. Though, with The Lair, it's on his shoulders. And it's also not very good. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. If you agree, disagree, let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like and a follow. And speaking of follows, so far I have 255 followers. I'd like to thank all of you because you're the reason I do this.